that. So then the question is, yes, but I thought I was connecting with my higher self. I thought I was working with my divinity. And the answer can be found in a couple of ways. The obvious answer is if it's your higher self and you ask the question, higher self, is this my higher self that I've been working with for the past 6 months? If you get yes, then it's a no-brainer. But here's what I will say to you. If you need to ask the question about the past, it means that you're still judging yourself and you're in 3D. And when you allow whatever it is that was in the past that took you to the place to be here, if you allow that to be the present and to be in the moment, it won't matter, because if the work you have been doing has served you and your higher self connection, then it'll roll out. If your work has not been of the higher self, then you'll start to see a change in the information and the direction. You'll feel a different tone than what you used to have. And so we're not saying to abandon your previous work. What is being said here is watch the difference. If you go to a restaurant and you say, I want to order sushi, and they say, oh yes, we have sushi, and they bring you something that isn't sushi, just because they call it sushi doesn't make it sushi. Okay? And the same is true for you. You can call your connection whatever you want to call it, but the problem is until you name it higher self, it can be anything else that wants to impersonate the higher self. Now, the most common impersonation is the lower self. And when Drumbelow first began teaching about the lower self, I was directly studying with him, and I was flabbergasted because I thought, the lower self, I haven't dealt with the lower self in years. That's not who I am. That's not part of me. And I kind of blew it off. And I didn't think that applied to me, that, I had somehow moved beyond it or some such thing. So one day I was at a party and my friends had put out, and there were some interesting people there, and I met a man that I was very interested in connecting with, and I could feel he was interested in me. So I asked my higher self if I should go out with him if he asked me out. And the answer was yes. And the man did indeed ask me out, and we did go on a date, and the only way I can describe the date is to say it was flat. Well, what does that mean? It means it wasn't good and it wasn't bad. And did I like this man? Well, yeah. And I was attracted to him. He liked me. He was attracted to me. So why do we have a flat date? Who knows? But what I can tell you is I came home, and I went right to my altar, and I complained. And I said, what was that all about? That was a big waste of my time. I know I'm never going to see this guy again. And, I've got better things to do with my time than to be wasting it, talking to somebody that I'm never going to see again. And my higher self said to me, you never asked your higher self. And I said, what? I most certainly did. Oh, no. You asked, and your lower self jumped in and answered. Now, what is your lower self? Your lower self is your desire body, your emotional body, your, the part of you that wants the little girl in you or the little boy in you. So my desire body was all over him sexually. The lower self wanted to be paid attention to. The little girl in me wanted to be special and be taken out to dinner. All those things were important. So the lower self responded for me. Now, how did this happen that I asked my higher self and my lower self jumped in? And the answer is I had a very good connection with my higher self, but sometimes my lower self was very good at impersonating my higher self. So the way to know for sure is to always specify, is this my higher self telling me, totally okay to do such and such? Only your higher self is permitted to say yes. Now, the original teaching of higher self and lower self came from the Hunas. And when Drumbelow brought it forward, he said that he had a class on the higher self, and a man came in who was very highly evolved and had this amazing energy. And so Drumbelow said, why don't you teach us stuff on the higher self? And so the man did. And that's when Drumbelow first learned of the lower self. He too felt the way I did, that the higher self was the only connection and that the lower self wasn't important. But I want you to understand the lower self is not bad or wrong or on a hidden agenda. The lower self is like the child in you. The higher self is like the God in you. They are both valid. Your lower self is going to tell you to get off the road when there's danger. Your lower self is going to tell you when you enter a room and the energy is not good. And so is that knowing bad or wrong? Of course not. It's perfect. It's totally perfect. The lower self is what influences the pendulum and the the forms of divination where people use their finger and go like this. Or if they are using the I Ching or any of those tools, that's all lower self information. Now there's two things you need to know about that. Number one, others can influence your lower self information. That's the first thing. The second thing is you and your agenda, your desires, your personality, your beliefs will also influence the lower self information. And it will influence it to the advantage that is believed needed. So this leads us to the fact that the lower self is going to give you accurate information to a point. For example, the lower self is ideal to ask, what vitamins should I take? What modalities should I be working with? What healing process is best for me? Those are all lower self, wonderful lower self questions that will help you, because the lower self is reading your body. But if you have someone who has an agenda that's in the room and they think you should be doing one modality, their energy on that modality will influence the result that you get. The second thing is the pendulum or any of these other forms will be right most of the time, but they won't be right all the time. And if you're used to believing that it's right all the time and then it leads you astray, you will remember it. And this is another key to help you understand the lower self is limited in scope. The higher self is unlimited in scope. The lower self will give you reactive response, reactive information. The higher self is proactive. And in the next video, I will tell you about a story about the difference between the higher self and the lower self.